42-year-old Susan Seymour Adams lived in Austin, Texas, with her husband, Tom. Susan and Tom shared a love for the outdoors, although Susan was not as adventurous as her husband. She did not have many outdoor survival skills, mainly preferring to go birdwatching and take walks in the woods, while Tom was interested in more strenuous activities. In 1990, the couple spent several months planning a trip to the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness, near the Idaho-Montana border. They booked their trip through Iron Horse Outfitters, an outfitting and guide business, to ensure that they would have a memorable but safe time in such a remote area. On September 22nd, the couple arrived in Idaho Falls and then drove to Hamilton, Montana. There, they met up with Art Griffith, the owner of Iron Horse Outfitters. On September 26th, the three of them embarked on the journey to the campsite Art's company owned. The camp was in the Battle Lake area, not far from the Bitterroot Divide. The final leg of the trip to reach the camp was a 7-hour-long horseback ride. On September 29th, Tom and one of the guides from the camp set out on an overnight hunting trip. Susan and another guide rode on horseback with them up to a ridge above the camp. There, they parted ways. Tom and his guide began their excursion, and Susan and the other guide brought the 4 horses back to the camp. This ridge would be the last place Tom Adams saw his wife. Tom and his guide returned to camp the following afternoon. When they arrived, Susan was not there. The camp's cook said that Susan had told him that morning that she was going to a nearby meadow to spend some time doing some bird watching, but had never returned. When she left the camp, Susan had only binoculars and a camera with her. Tom immediately began looking for Susan in the area surrounding the camp. When it began getting dark, he expanded the area he was searching. He finally found some of her tracks on a trail. He followed the footprints to a spot roughly 20 feet away from the meadow, where they abruptly stopped. The guides from the outfitting company helped search for Susan all throughout the night, and the following morning, one of them rode on horseback 25 miles to get help. The weather was a major obstacle in the search for Susan. 2 days after she went missing, snow began to fall, and the search had to be called off. After a week, the weather cleared up enough for the search to resume, but it only went on for another 3 days before more snow forced the efforts to be halted for the winter. Unable to search for Susan in the wilderness, authorities spent this time investigating the last people to see her. Tom, the cook, and at least one of the guides from the camp were all given polygraph examinations. They all passed. In 1991, a massive search was launched to try and find Susan's remains. Tom Adams worked for the governor of Texas, who helped get resources for the search. Helicopters, the National Guard, tracking dogs, and numerous volunteers were all a part of the effort. Members of the search teams covered acres and acres of territory, walking almost shoulder to shoulder in an effort to make sure they did not miss any potential clues. During the course of the search, some footprints were discovered, although they were not conclusively linked to Susan. The tracks appeared to be from someone who was injured, with their left foot angled out to an unusual degree, indicating that it was fractured or sprained. No other sign of Susan was found, either in 1991 or since. Arvin Nelson was a popular member of the community in Big Sur, California. The 55-year-old was a longtime server at the Big Sur River Inn. His sweet and outgoing personality made him known to almost all of the town's local residents. Arvin was also an avid outdoorsman who was very familiar with most of the terrain in the area. On August 6, 2014, he decided to begin a backpacking trip through an area he had not previously hiked. He had a friend drop him off at the China Camp trailhead in the Los Padres National Forest. He planned to spend a week hiking the eastern side of the Ventana Wilderness, passing through Sykes Hot Springs on his way back to Big Sur. The area was very remote, but Arvin packed enough food and equipment to help him survive in the wilderness for that extended period of time. Arvin made sure that people knew about his plans, and that he expected to return home by August 14th. He left instructions with a friend to notify authorities if he did not arrive back in Big Sur when planned. August 14th came and went with no sign of Arvin. On August 16th, he was reported missing. The subsequent investigation discovered that the last known people to see Arvin were Jack English and his son Dennis. They had an isolated cabin in the Pine Valley area of the Ventana Wilderness. Arvin had approached their cabin on August 6th, the day he entered the wilderness, having discovered the cabin by following the sound of Dennis playing guitar. The three of them struck up a conversation and spent the following 2 days playing music and hiking around the area. When Jack and Dennis left the area by helicopter on August 8th, Arvin told them that he was going to remain in the area until the morning of the 10th, when he would continue on his planned hike. A massive search effort was launched by the local sheriff's department to look for Arvin. The National Guard, the U.S. Forest Service, the California Highway Patrol, and the Coast Guard all aided in the effort. 3 helicopters and 1 small airplane conducted an aerial search. Dozens of volunteers turned out each day for the ground search, and search and rescue teams from 4 different counties all helped look for Arvin. Typically, this kind of search would only be conducted for 5 to 7 days. However, since Arvin had the skills and the supplies needed to survive in the wilderness, the search continued on beyond this window, even without it producing any clues. The final ground search was conducted on the 9th day of the effort. The aerial search continued on for a few days before wrapping up. No sign of Arvin, or his belongings, has ever been found. Connie Johnson had decades of experience working in the wilderness. She had worked as a U.S. Forest Service wilderness ranger at the Moose Creek Ranger Station in the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forests. She had also been a member of the Selway Bitterroot Foundation, leading tours of the Idaho backcountry. Even at 76 years old, she maintained an active lifestyle in a remote area. In 2018, she was working as a camp cook for Ritchie Outfitters. The company's camp was in the Fog Mountain area, near Big Rock, in a remote part of the national forest that could only be reached on foot or by horseback. On October 2nd, a group of hunters left the camp to go out deeper into the wilderness to hunt. The following day, they were in contact with Connie over their radios. However, they could not make out what Connie was saying. When they arrived back at camp on October 5th, Connie and her beloved border collie Ace were gone. Several teams of tracking dogs were brought in to search for Connie, and the U.S. Air Force, the Idaho National Guard, and the Clearwater County Backcountry Helicopter Rescue Team all contributed aircraft for the aerial search. Members of the search teams combed the area on foot and on horseback. None of these efforts located Connie or Ace, and the official search was eventually called off on October 14th. On October 23rd, an area pilot spotted a dog at the Moose Creek Ranger Station airstrip, 15 miles from where Connie was last seen. It was Ace. After he was fed, he was examined by a vet and found to be in good health. He had lost weight during the time he had been missing, but was otherwise perfectly fine. Once Ace was cared for, Connie's family worked with a non-profit search dog organization out of Montana to transport him back to the search area, in hopes that he would lead them to Connie. The effort was unsuccessful. Connie's disappearance remains unsolved. 28-year-old David Morrison was originally from Fresno, California, but was living in San Francisco and working as a chef there in 1998. That Memorial Day weekend, David and a group of his friends decided to visit Yosemite National Park. On the morning of Memorial Day, May 25th, David decided to hike up to Yosemite's famous Half Dome. He left Curry Village in Little Yosemite Valley, where the group had been staying, around 7:15 a.m., and told his girlfriend that he would be back later in the afternoon. David has not been seen since. David was an experienced hiker, but he had essentially no equipment with him on this particular excursion, carrying only a belt bag around his waist. He left for his hike wearing layers, but the thickest of them was a sweatshirt, which would have provided little protection against the snow that fell that night. Another 4 inches of snow would fall later in the week. The weather complicated the search effort for David, both because it made hiking difficult for the search teams, and because the snow covered up potential clues, like tracks, that could have led to David, who was presumed to be lost and most likely injured. Resources were also diverted away from the search for David the day after he was last seen, when 2 trapped climbers needed to be rescued. The search effort included David's family, numerous volunteers, teams of search dogs, and a helicopter. Despite all of this effort, David and his belongings were not found. 3 days after David was last seen, members of the search team found 6 tracks. The tread impressions in them matched the kind that would be left by the type of shoes David had been wearing. It could not be confirmed that the tracks belonged to David, and they did not help locate him. The full-scale search ended the Friday after David went missing. The search then entered a limited technical mode, with only a dozen trained climbers and 24 search dogs continuing to search for David. David's family has continued to return to Yosemite every year to look for him, and to visit the small memorial his mother placed near Half Dome. His family hopes that even after more than 20 years, they will be able to find David's body and resolution to his disappearance. "53-year-old Teresa Schmidt lived in Avon, Indiana, where she worked as a social worker. In September of 2002, she traveled to Colorado with her husband. He was an anesthesiologist and was attending a medical conference there. The couple was staying at the Lost Valley Guest Ranch during their trip. On September 6th, Teresa decided to go for a hike. She left her room at the ranch with 2 water bottles and a jacket in her backpack. She was seen hiking along a trail that led to an overlook on the east side of the ranch's property around 3 p.m. that afternoon. She was never seen again after that. Teresa was an experienced hiker and had stayed at the ranch in the past, so she was familiar with the area. However, a recent forest fire had dramatically changed the area's landscape, so Teresa may not have been able to rely on visual clues to guide her back to her room like she may have expected to. Teresa's husband reported her missing at 7 p.m. the day she was last seen, when she did not meet him back in their room, but the search for her was not started until 2 a.m. on September 7th. The search was extensive, however. More than 70 volunteers helped search for Teresa, and authorities used tracking dogs and helicopters. Teresa's husband used a motorcycle to cover a larger area during his own several-day search. The only clues found in Teresa's disappearance were 2 sets of footprints, one on each side of nearby Chessman Overlook, believed to belong to her. Neither she nor any of her belongings have ever been found. Teresa's family, acknowledging that she most likely succumbed to the elements while lost in the wilderness, held a memorial service for her after she went missing. However, her case remains unsolved, and her family is still waiting to give her a proper burial.